Copy that, Bravo team. No contact, 15:32 hours. Proceed northeast on your assigned route. Continue patrolling. Next check-in, 1,700 hours. 1,700 hours. Happy hunting. That's what happened. That thing that we all thought couldn't happen. And things have gotten pretty bad. We tried to stay in place for a while, but then we had to make a decision. Do we stay or do we go? Do we bug out, or can we make it at home? Eventually, we had to go. But there was a lot of thought that went into it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Before you bug out, when you have that situation, whether it be a natural disaster, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, floods, or civil unrest of some sort. There's a lot that goes into it if you're going to try to leave where you're at, if you're going to leave your home. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is if something happens, do we want to stay or do we want to go? Do we want to bug in? Do we want to bug out? There's a lot of good reasons to do both. And so before you make a decision, you need to plan for this. You need to plan for it well ahead of time. Because this is not something that is going to happen quickly. And it's not something that's going to happen without a lot of thought and preparation done ahead of time. You have to be ready. You have to be squared away, have your equipment in place, have your supplies in place, and you have to have a plan. So let's talk about some of the considerations. We look around us today. We just had a major hurricane hit North Carolina, South Carolina, displaced a lot of people, dumped 30 inches of rain, plus some in other areas. Almost impossible to move, almost impossible to travel. If you were living in that situation and you didn't plan for it ahead of time, how would you move? How would you get home? How would you get out of there if you needed to? Those are things you need to think about. Earthquakes, fires, tornadoes, civil unrest. We don't know where that can pop up at any time. So, we have to be prepared for all of them. So how do we do that? So, the first thing to do is you have to evaluate your situation. You have to understand who is it that you need to get from point A to point B. Is it just yourself? Is it your family? How big is your family? What are the ages of your family? We're going to talk about age considerations. We're going to talk about medical considerations. We're going to talk about everything else you have to think about before you decide that, you know what, where I'm at's just not safe. I'm not going to be able to stay here long term. I need to get somewhere. So to do that, let's start by taking a look at some of those considerations. So the first part of bugging out starts with actually getting home. The bag you saw me take off earlier is not my bug out bag. That's my get home bag. A get home bag and a bug out bag are different. They serve two different purposes. A get home bag is meant to get you from wherever you're at when the emergency starts, when the situation starts, back to your home base of operations. Okay? Because realistically for most of us, home is where we're going to have the bulk of our supplies, the bulk of our ammo, the bulk of our medical supplies, food, water, sanitation, all of those things. And that's where our family's going to be. And that's where our other resources are going to be. Vehicles. Maybe we have a vehicle that we use to go to work, but maybe we have a vehicle that's better suited for bugging out and getting away from a situation. And that's going to be at home, quite possibly. Here, irregardless, for me, everything starts with getting home. So we've got videos on a get home bag. I've updated mine since I've done that video, so we're going to do another one, and we'll have a more detailed discussion about that coming up in future videos. So we get home. And again, as I said, there's a lot of things that go into making a decision to stay in place or bug out. The first thing that we need to do is to be able to gather intelligence. We have to have some type of communications equipment and abilities, whether that be ham radios like you saw me in that opening clip, GMRS radios, AM/FM radios for gathering information about the situation and what's going on. Because in order to make a good decision as to whether or not to bug out or bug in, I have to know what I'm dealing with. Is this particular disaster or emergency, is it my local area? Is it a tornado that only affected a 2-mile path, a 2-mile swath? And if I can get beyond that, then I can reach safety and I can reach additional resources. Is it a hurricane that has flooded 100 miles, 200 miles inland? That's a totally different game. That's a totally different situation when I've got to travel, from where I'm at, and the affected area is a 50, 75, 100 mile, circumference around me. In order for me to get to food, shelter, water, and safety, medical attention, whatever it may be, I may have to travel 25, 30, 50, 75 miles over what type of terrain, what type of obstacles am I going to face? Is there flooding? Are bridges out? Do you live, where you're trying to get? Is there a waterway in between you and your destination? Is it a river? Is it a creek? Is it a stream? What's the condition of that? You get there, it may be 20 miles away, and you got to get 10 miles on the other side. You get there, and it's too wide, too fast moving to ford the river. Now what do? You've expended a lot of energy and a lot of resources to get there. What's next? What's your plan B? So we have to gather intelligence. We have to find out how large of an area is affected, where that affected area is in reference to where we are at, and what's it going to take to get us from where we're at to an area of safety. Okay? So communication is one of those things, knowing your area, having maps, having GPS available to you. All those are good tools to have if you want to try to navigate from point A to point B. All right, and it will tell you, maps and GPS will give you some topology. It will show you where some rivers are. It will show you, what at least a basics of the terrain, hilly, ups, downs, valleys, so on and so forth. Okay, is it urban, or are we out in the woods in the country like we are here? These are all things that you need to know so that you can put together an effective bug out plan. Because you're not going to know until it happens as to what the area is, how large it is, and what hazards you may face getting from point A to point B. So the second thing you need to look at is the makeup of your group. My particular group, I've got 4 children, ages range from 5 to 16. My 16-year-old is very capable. He can lug a backpack, he can shoot, he can, help defend, he can pull watch, he can cook, he can hunt. My 5-year-old can't do those things. My 16-year-old can cover a lot more ground in a short amount of time than what my 5-year-old can. So there's 6 of us, and my plan also includes my wife's parents and her brother and sister and their 2 children. Now, her parents are older. They've got some health issues. So they're not going to be able to travel as far as fast as what we are. So that's something you need to consider. What is the age of the group that you've got? What are their capabilities? Are you going to have to assist a 5-year-old? Are you going to have to carry a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old? Do you have elderly members of your family who have mobility issues, who may have special needs? You may be dealing with walkers, canes, wheelchairs, all those types of things. So if you're gonna make an effective plan, you have to plan for all those realities that you have before the event actually happens. So you've got your group, you've figured out what you need to do. You need to look at your options and need to know what your options are if you have to leave your place of safety, your home, your residence, your wherever that is for you, are you going to be able to travel by vehicle? I don't know. It's going to depend upon the situation. If you can travel by vehicle, you can carry more supplies. You can carry more people. You can overcome some of those mobility issues. If you can't travel by vehicle and you've got to go on foot, that changes the game completely. Okay? So you have to plan for that ahead of time. You have to know what you're up against. Which is why when you take a look at all of these things, the fact that if you're on foot, you can't carry a lot of supplies. People with mobility issues are going to be a tremendous burden on the group. They're going to slow you down and make it very difficult for you to get anywhere. And the fact that at home, I've got far more resources available to me, I'm a big proponent of bugging in. Stay in. Unless you absolutely cannot. So, if you can't, let's get into bugging out in a little bit more depth here. Okay, so we've got our group, we've got our family that are going to be bugging out with us. If we have any of the challenges we talked about before, medical issues, maybe require medicines, do those medicines require refrigeration? Morbidly obese people in our family or in our group, young children or older family members that may have mobility issues that aren't going to move as fast, aren't going to be able to carry weight, but yet we're still going to have to carry supplies for them. Medicine, clothing, shelter, food, those types of things. So those things are going to have to be broken up amongst those who are able to carry more weight. Okay? So we've got our plan, which I can't stress enough. That's where this all starts. You have to have a plan. And you have to have a plan A, B, C, D, E, F, all the way through, because the only thing certain in a disaster is that it's going to change and you're not going to know all the information you need to know in order to deal with the situation effectively. You're just not. Communications is going to be hampered. Services are going to be hampered. I've spent 28 years in fire EMS, okay? And I can tell you, and this is something that most people don't realize, and the looks on people's faces when I tell them this, when I'm teaching seminars live and I've got people in front of me, we plan for disasters. And on a regular night, we've got a major Big Ten university here in our community, and on a regular night when nothing is happening, it's just a normal Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, our emergency services can get to the point where all of our fire trucks are out. All of our ambulances are out handling calls. We don't have any personnel or apparatus to respond to calls. So think about this. When you have a disaster situation, we plan here in the area that we live in, all the agencies in our disaster plans plan that we're going to have to run on about 30% staffing from normal. Because firefighters, EMTs, police officers, they're humans. They have families. And they may have to be home taking care of their family. They may not even be able to get to work. It just depends. So here we plan on having 30% staffing. So if on a regular night with 100% staffing, we can find ourselves in situations where we don't have enough personnel, people, or apparatus to respond to the calls for service that we have now. Imagine what it's going to be like when we've got 30% of our personnel and our calls for service have jumped up 10-fold, 20-fold, 100-fold. You're in a major disaster. Okay, you're in a major situation. Everybody's going to be calling for help. It's not just you. Everybody. The 911 operators may not even be able to get there. My wife's a nurse. Luckily, we live close to the hospital. She's involved with the disaster plan there. She could walk to the hospital if she had to. We can get her there. The hospital has to plan for this. So when we have a disaster, you have to be prepared to take care of yourself, because services just may not be available. They just may not. So, in dealing with that, you have to plan for these things. And I can't stress this enough, because this all starts with a plan. So if you have to bug out, you have to know, where are you going to go? How far is that? What's the makeup of your group? How fast are you going to be able to travel? What hazards may you encounter along the way? Is there flooding? Is there fires? Is there civil unrest? Is it an earthquake? And the earth may have fissures and open up. There may be down buildings, down power lines. Any one of a number of things. How are you going to deal with all those particular situations with your group? And couple that with the fact that if you're bugging out, you're not going to be the only one. There's going to be other people. And look around your neighborhood. Think about your friends. Think about your neighbors. How many of them do you think are prepared for a situation like this? How many of them do you think have a bug out bag, have any equipment, any gear, any training? I bet it's a pretty low number. I know it is in my neighborhood. So another thing that you have to think about is security. Because if you're squared away, put together, and you have resources, when people are scared and they're hungry and they're tired and they don't know what the future holds for them, they can get pretty ugly. They can do some things that are very out of character and not normal for people to do. So, you have to be able to bug out in a way so that you don't attract attention to yourself. So that means you keep your kit slim. You don't carry any more than you need, which means you're not going to be able to take a lot with you. So you're going to have to resupply on the way. How are you going to do that? Have you pre-positioned resources, food, water, shelter, that you can get to? Where did you pre-position them at? If your bug out location is southwest from your location, but the disaster happened between you and your bug out location, if that's the worst of it, does it make sense to go that way? What are you going to do? These challenges are immense. I can't stress that enough. There's a lot of romanticism associated with bugging out. But let me just tell you, if it ever has to happen, it's going to suck. It is not going to be a good experience for anybody. Because you just can't carry everything that you need. Now, if you practice, if you train, you can survive. It won't be comfortable. Don't forget the bug spray. The mosquitoes are coming out here at dusk. You won't be comfortable. But can you do it? You can. If you're the most planned and prepared out there. So, we made the decision we have to bug out. It's not safe. Floodwaters are rising. Fires coming right for us. Whatever the situation may be. So, do we have our equipment together? That's something you should have together or have the ability to have together in a moment's notice. All right? You may not have a lot of time. Your equipment should be built in a systems format. That's what I do. I have a get-home bag, and that get-home bag folds right into and supplements my bug-out bag. So that way I'm not duplicating pieces, I'm not duplicating effort. All right? I can take my get-home bag, take that contents, add a few things to it, and I've got a bug-out bag, and I'm ready to go. All right? I'm building a vehicle that is very capable with on-road and off-road. I use the crate system at home. I've got crates for medical supplies, for food, for cooking, for utensils, for hygiene. All right? They're already put together, ready to go. I can grab them, throw them in a vehicle, and be gone within just a matter of a few minutes. Okay? So you need to really step back and plan, because that's where all this starts, and this is where you're going to either succeed or fail, is in your planning. If you don't plan, then you're planning to fail, because that's what's going to happen. Doggone skeeters. Now we're going to talk about what's involved in creating a bug out plan. Okay, so we've talked about some of the considerations that we need to keep in mind. We need to think about the type of disaster that we're facing. We need to know, is it a disaster that we knew was coming, like a hurricane, and we've had time to plan and time to react? Was it something that happened spontaneously? Like a tornado, severe storms, earthquake, civil unrest. We need to know the size and the scope of the area affected. Is it something that's very localized that we don't have to travel very far to get away from? Is it something that covers a larger geography that's going to take more time and effort for us to get away from? What's the anticipated length of this particular situation? That is a very critical factor, because if it's something that's only going to affect you for 2-3 days, a week, 2 weeks, that will factor into your plan, how you're going to react to it, and what steps you're going to take. Okay? We've talked a little bit about getting home. To me, any bug out situation starts with getting home. That's where my family is. That's where my resources are. So I need to get there so that I can bring the group together and we can execute our plan. We talked a little bit about being able to gather intelligence. You need to be able to find these things out. All those things we mentioned before, the size of the area affected, the scope of the disaster, the geography that's been affected, anticipated length, so on and so forth. That all comes through our intelligence gathering. We talked a little bit about that, and we'll talk more about that in future videos. Okay? So, we'll need to define as part of your plan how you're going to gather intelligence. What methods are you going to use? What equipment is going to be needed for you to gather that intelligence? Okay? So that has to go in your plan. Communications. You need to have communications with your family or the other members of your team, your bug out team, whether that be your neighbors, your church group, like-minded individuals that you know, other family members that are maybe a little farther away and have to try to get to a common rendezvous point. Somehow you need to come up with communications. What's our strategy going to be? How are we going to do that? So that's going to be a portion of the bug out plan we're going to need to address. We need to address the threshold. Okay, I mentioned it a little while ago here that different disasters have different lengths of time that they're going to affect us and different scopes. If this is a localized disaster that is only going to last for 72 hours, maybe a week tops, that changes our thinking. We may be able to shelter in place. We may not have to bug out. That may be the better choice. But in order to know that, we have to define as part of our bug out plan, what's the threshold? What triggers us saying, okay, now we need to go. We have to get out of here. All right? So we have to define that threshold as part of our bug out plan. You have to define the size and makeup of your group. Okay, we talked about that a little bit. The ages of the group, any special medical conditions that the group has, any mobility issues that the group has. Do we have special needs family members or special needs family members of other folks that are going to be bugging out with us? Their emotional state, how they deal with change, how they deal with things. If you've got, a child or adult with autism or developmental disabilities, you need to be able to account for those things, because this is going to be a very strange and unfamiliar thing for them to do, and you need to know how they're going to react. And is that going to compromise the security of the group? Is that going to cause you other issues that you need to plan for ahead of time? Okay? You need to decide where you're going to go. Okay? If you bug out, you have to have a destination in mind. You can't just throw a backpack on your back and say, oh, we're going to go that way and see what happens. You can't do that. You have to know where you're going to go, and that's where your intelligence gathering comes in, to know where is our points of safety. What is the least amount of distance that we have to travel to get to safety, to get to an area where we have resources available to us. Okay? How are you going to get there? Your method of travel. Is it going to be on foot? It's going to be on bicycle, horseback, motorcycle, car, truck. You know, all these things are going to affect what you can do and how you can do it. It's going to affect the amount of supplies you can carry. It's going to affect the amount of people you can carry. It's going to affect the time that it takes. So we need to plan for that. Equipment and supplies. We're not going to talk a lot about equipment and supplies because we really can't get into that until we have a plan done and we understand what our requirements are. I can't go just start buying a bunch of random stuff hoping that it all works, because it may not be what I need. Your equipment and supplies is going to be very dependent upon a lot of different things. You know, it's going to be length of time. How many days, weeks, months are you going to need to have this equipment function for you? Okay, gas-powered stoves with the small canisters is a different story than a refillable stove that you can carry a couple of gallons of Coleman gas or white fuel with you, or something that runs off unleaded or diesel. Okay, so until we define what our equipment needs to do, it's pointless to talk about equipment. And it's also going to depend upon your geography. It's going to be dependent upon the time of year and the season. You know, here in the Midwest, we have a lot of water available. So in my plan, I don't need to really worry too much about carrying a lot of water with me, because I can't go, 500 yards without running into a creek, a stream, a pond. I've got lots of water. So that's not something that I have to worry about. I do need to figure out how to filter it, and transport it short distances, but I don't have to worry about carrying gallons and gallons and gallons of water with me as someone would maybe in the desert Southwest. If you're in an area like the desert Southwest where it may be miles, tens of miles, hundreds of miles to get to a water source, you've got to plan differently for that. All right. So equipment's going to be dependent upon your geography. It's going to be dependent upon the season. Midwest here, it's October, starting to get cooler out. If I have to bug out in December, January, February, I need a whole different set of gear than if I'm bugging out in June, July, or August. Okay, temperatures are different. We face different threats. Okay, training is another big piece of your bug out plan. You need to do an inventory of the training that you have already and what training you're going to get. And then you need to make a plan and get that training, because I can tell you right now, training is worth far more than any piece of kit that you might have. Okay? Having a bag full of stuff and not knowing how to use it, not knowing what to do with it, means nothing. Whereas with the proper training, you can get by without a lot of that kit and still survive and thrive and be relatively comfortable. Okay? So part of your bug out plan includes pre-plan activities, pre-disaster activities, getting training, okay, understanding how to utilize the skills that you have, utilize the skills that you're going to get, and put together an education plan to get the skills that are going to help you most in your environment. Okay? So once you've answered all these questions about the type of disaster, how you're going to get home, communications and methods of equipment, size and makeup of your group, medical conditions, where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, what's your method of transport, what equipment and supplies do you need, okay, and your training. I can't stress that one enough, because training is extremely critical. Then you can build a bug out plan that will deal with each one of those questions, all right? And each one of those questions, for me, a bug out plan needs to address 4 areas, okay? In order to survive, we need food and water, we need shelter, we need security, and we need to take care of our health, okay? So any bug out plan that we build has to be built around those 4 items. Again, food, water, shelter, security, and health. So, to build your plan, you need to answer all of these questions that I've laid out here in front of you. Now, again, this is just a starter list. There's a lot of detail that we could go into, and this would be a 3-hour video. We can't do that. This is a good starting point, and that's what this is meant to be, is a starting point to get you thinking about the critical items that you're going to need to handle if you have to bug out. Okay? Equipment is not one of the big ones. That's one of the easy ones because we can see it, touch it, and feel it. But it's not really what's going to help you survive. All right? Your mind is going to help you survive. Your training is going to help you survive. And having a good plan is going to help you survive. And a good plan will answer all of these questions that I've laid out for you here. Okay? Now, how you put that plan together is up to you. Whatever works best for you. Some people put it in a document. Some people put it in a spreadsheet. Some people put it on note cards. I don't care how you create it, how you put it together. The thing that is most important is that, A, you sit down and you honestly assess your situation. All right? Because the other piece that we haven't really talked about is in a bug out situation, a disaster situation, dealing with stress, and what is your level of physical conditioning, because both of those items are going to be critically important. You're going to be asking your body to do things that it's not used to doing for a much longer duration and much harder than when things are normal. So, physical conditioning is an extremely important part of being prepared to deal with a disaster. It's an extremely important part of responding to that disaster, especially if you have to bug out. Throw 40, 50 pounds on your back, have to cover rough terrain in all weather conditions. Do you think you could do that? So we need to get in shape, me included. I can still go out and hike 12, 14 miles a day carrying a pack, but I could do a whole lot better if I was 50 pounds less. That's what I'm working on. All right, so you have to honestly assess where you're at. Then you have to decide where you need to be to give yourself the best chance of survival. Then you have to make that part of your plan, part of your bug out plan, this pre-work that we all have to do, so that you will give yourself and your family the best chance at surviving one of these situations. So, bottom line, a bug out plan needs to cover food, water, shelter, security, and taking care of your health. All right? I've given you a list of questions here to start with that will address a good chunk of the situations that we will all run into. Now, everyone's going to be different. Your situation is unique and different than mine. It's based upon the geography, the weather, the seasons, the time of year, the size and makeup of your group, your medical conditions you have to deal with, ages, just a number of things that we've talked about here in this video today. So take some time, take some notes, go back and look at these things and see how they apply to your group, to your situation. And then once you do that, once you answer these questions, you can start to build a plan that will tell you where you're going to go, how you're going to get there, how you're going to communicate, how you're going to maintain security, how you're going to feed yourself, make sure you have water, deal with your health, provide security for the group, and several other topics. But these are the most important ones. These are where we start. So I hope this was helpful. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort. But again, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So train, be safe, and put together your plan. It's going to evolve over time. It's going to change as your equipment grows, as your training grows, as your group changes. Okay? This is a living document. You're going to start with something, and you're going to build upon it, and you're going to be constantly modifying and changing it. Everybody's plan is going to be different. Everybody has different needs. Everybody has different capabilities. Everybody lives in a different geography, different ages, different health issues. So you have to tailor your plan to you. Okay, yours is not going to look like mine or anyone else's, other than the common things, which are, again, build a plan that accounts for food and water, shelter, security, and managing your health. Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. Stay tuned for future videos. It's going to dive into some of these topics in greater detail, as well as some other topics that you need to address in dealing with a disaster situation and bugging out. Have a great night.